Happy Wednesday! You're listening to Mama Murdered a Podcast. I'm your host, AB. And this week on Mama Murdered a Podcast, we're covering the most notorious serial killer that you may never have heard of, Israel Keyes, a serial killer who had no victim type, no triangulated area that he killed in, and no MO. He killed completely at random and no one was safe. So, without further ado, let's get it. Israel Keyes was born on January 7th in 1978 to his parents, John and Heidi Keyes, in Utah. Israel was the second born of his parents' 10 kids, so he was born into a super big, super odd family. And I know that the definition of normal is different for every family, but this family was definitely odd. And I say that for a number of different reasons. Because Israel's parents didn't believe in the government or modern medicine, which the not believing in modern medicine would be fine on its own. But that's just the tip of the iceberg of things that his parents didn't believe in. They also didn't believe in having heat, air, or electricity in general while he was growing up. He was homeschooled by his parents for the majority of his regular, grade school through high school years. And the family mostly lived deep in the woods and in super isolated areas. When Israel was still relatively young, his parents uprooted the family from Utah and moved the entire family to Washington. And while they lived in Washington, they also lived in the deepest parts of the woods and isolation there as well. Also, while in Washington, Israel's family left the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints to join a white supremacy church. And I didn't write down, and I don't remember the exact name of the church that the family joined, but I do remember that even the name of the church sounded racist as hell. So, I said what I said. The family never stayed in one place for very long, though. In the late 1990s, the family moved again, this time to Oregon. But the Keyes family also lived in places like Utah, Washington, Oregon, and even relocating to Maine at one point, where they lived in a nearby Amish community. I mean, they were just all over the place. And when Keyes was young, he loved hunting and he loved guns, and when he was asked about it later, he said that he would pursue, quote-unquote, anything with a heartbeat. He would capture and torture animals, and he was known for breaking into the houses of his neighbors and stealing things from their house. But he mostly just stole things like guns, knives, ammo, things like that is really the only reason he was breaking into these houses. Keyes would also randomly set fires in neighbors' yards just to watch it burn. And when his parents would find these stolen guns and, knives, whatever, they would make him take the stolen guns or whatever else he'd stolen back to the neighbors and make him apologize. So, I guess at least they were trying to correct his behavior, but they probably should have gotten him counseling or something instead. Which actually brings me to my next point, which I think is super weird. Israel's parents and the neighbors that Israel was stealing stuff from, they all ended up becoming really good friends after Israel's parents made him return the stolen goods to the neighbor. So his parents made him take the guns and stuff that he'd stolen back from him, and then they just made friends afterwards, I guess. That's a really weird way to make new friends, but, I guess a barbecue's a barbecue. And we love a good barbecue. Also, a weird random fun fact about the neighbors that Keyes' parents had befriended. One of the neighbors' kids also later went on to become a convicted murderer. So, what are the odds that two different families become friends because one of the families has a kid with sticky fingers, and yet both families end up having kids that would go on to murder people? Random or not? Now, I know I mentioned that Keyes would start fires at random places, but he would also go around and shoot BBs at the neighbors' houses and cars. So he's just out here messing up everybody's stuff and acting as if it's really no big deal, which I just find that so weird. Because Keyes didn't come from a family with a lot of money where he would feel entitled or feel like he was just able to mess up other people's things. He came from a family that was living in the woods with the absolute bare minimum materialistic things. And he's just shooting BBs into people's houses and cars and stuff. I don't get it. I feel like toilet paper in someone's house or egg in someone's house or playing ding-dong ditch are normal teenage shenanigans. But Keyes was taking those normal teenage things to a whole different level. And when Keyes was later arrested and in custody, he told the detective that was talking to him, quote, "I've known since I was 14 that there were things that I thought were normal and okay that nobody else seemed to think were normal or okay." Okay, so let that be a red flag. And once Keyes was into his teenage years, he finally broke down and told his dad that he didn't really share the same religious beliefs that the rest of the family did. And this would be the breaking point for their father and son relationship. Keyes' dad disowned him for not having the same religious beliefs, but Keyes and his mom stayed pretty close, even after his dad had disowned him and made him leave the family home. And I realize that I'm going back and forth with calling him Israel or Keyes, but Israel really twists my tongue in a weird way that I don't like, and it just doesn't sound right in some sentences in my head. So it'll probably be Keyes for the majority of the episode, but either way, Israel or Keyes, I'm still referring to the same man. I'm just using his first and last name interchangeably. So, when Keyes was about 20 to 21 years old, he joined the U.S. Army in July of 1998. And he did surprisingly well in the Army. He spent some time in Texas, Washington, and even Egypt. Keyes would go on to get a DUI shortly before he was honorably discharged from the Army, but he was honorably discharged in 2001, though. And can we just take a second to talk about the fact that so many serial killers and murderers served in some part of our U.S. military? Some were Army, some were Navy, some were Marines, etc. But I always think that's so weird that all of them have some part in our U.S. military. Like, why? So, Keyes would go on to get in a relationship with a woman that I'm going to leave nameless, and I just named her Rachel for the purposes of the Israel Keyes episodes. Because this will be at least 2 parts. So, Rachel is the baby mama. That's not her real name, but that's what I'm naming her. Because, duh, Rachel from Friends, she's my favorite. Okay, so Keyes and Rachel would actually go on to have a daughter together, and I'm going to leave the daughter nameless for the same reason. So I'll use the name Lacey for his daughter. After Keyes was honorably discharged from the Army, he moved in with his girlfriend Rachel at the Macaw Reservation in Washington. I hope I said that right. And I'm not even going to lie to y'all. I didn't even try to find the information about Keyes' daughter, who I'll be calling Lacey, because she can't help who her dad is, and she hasn't committed any crimes. So I'm just like, go live your best life, kid. Her name's Lacey in this story. So just to clear that up, Rachel isn't actually the baby mama's name, and Lacey isn't actually his daughter's name. Those are just the names that I'm using to keep their information private. Now, Keyes and Rachel didn't actually stay together for long, and somehow a serial killer had custody of his daughter. But he did. And in March of 2007, Keyes and his daughter Lacey moved to Anchorage, Alaska to be able to live with Keyes' newest love interest. So, Keyes and Lacey are living with Keyes' new girlfriend in Anchorage, Alaska. And Keyes is actually blossoming in Alaska. He was a very normal neighbor, very normal boyfriend, dad, and he even opened his own construction company that he called Keyes Construction. Get it? Like, Keyes is his last name, but Keyes like house keys? It's kind of clever. And this construction business was actually pretty successful. I mean, it wasn't like he was struggling to make a profitable business or having to work a second job at the same time. Like, no, his construction business was successful enough that it was his only job and his only means of income. So he must have been doing okay. And Keyes was like a respected, productive, contributing member of society, which I always find that so weird when they can just like walk among us like they don't murder people for funsies. I don't get it. So I feel like there's not really a good way to go any further without kind of explaining more about Israel Keyes and who he is and what he did. So Israel Keyes was a serial killer, but he was different than any other kind of serial killer that I've ever heard of. Keyes had no victim profile. So he didn't only kill people that looked like his mom or looked like his dad or someone that only fit X, Y, and Z description. He killed whoever was most convenient and whoever was the most easily accessible person to him at the time that he had the urge to kill. Keyes would kill young adults, elderly people, white people, black people, teens, couples, men, women. Literally no one was safe. And I say that because most serial killers have a very specific type of victim. Like, for example, they may only want to kill women with blonde hair and blue eyes, or redheads with green eyes, which is usually how police put together a victim profile. It's kind of hard to pinpoint who's killing random people that look nothing alike and have no commonalities. Another thing that Keyes did to avoid law enforcement for as long as he did was that he would kill people all across the United States, in towns and cities that he had absolutely no ties to. So that just made it even harder to pinpoint who the murderer actually was. And I'll get more into how he would go from state to state and commit these murders in just a few. But one of the main reasons that I believe that Keyes was able to get away with these crimes for as long as he did is because his intelligence level bordered anywhere from above average to close to genius. Keyes was able to rape, murder, rob banks, commit arson, and so much more. And he was never even on police's radar. Like, not even almost close to being on their radar. Keyes would assemble, hide, and bury what he called kill kits. And he would put these all across the country. In abandoned fields, in small patches of grass next to parking lots, and even in neighborhoods. Keyes would bury these kill kits in random spots all across the country, and he'd just leave them there. Sometimes waiting as long as 2 years before he'd go back, dig them up, and use them. These kill kits were usually 5-gallon buckets that contained rope, guns, tape, knives, zip ties, extra ammo, trash bags, silencers for guns, gloves, and he would even put Drano in these kill kits since it had lye in it, and he would use the Drano to try to mess with the speed of the decomposition process. The FBI believes that Keyes took more than 35 separate trips across the country just to bury these kill kits between the years of 2004 and 2012. Keyes would often use the excuse that he was going to visit with family or old friends in order to be able to leave and take these trips without his current girlfriend becoming suspicious. Because he was living in Alaska with his current girlfriend, all of his family was, in other parts of the United States. So he would just make up these, like, I'm going to visit family excuses, or I'm going to meet with this old friend to catch up, and she just never asked questions. But before 2007, when he got with his girlfriend and moved to Alaska, he didn't really need an excuse, because he wasn't really tied down or in a relationship. But the woman that he lived with in Alaska, she would always keep his daughter while he was going on these trips to murder complete strangers. Because, she believed that he was just going to visit with family. But wouldn't you think that his family would want to see his daughter too? Like, I don't understand. Why not, the whole family go and make it like a family trip? I don't know what kinds of excuses he gave her for not taking his daughter with him, especially if he was telling her that he was going to visit with family. But whatever he was telling her, it was working. She would keep his daughter so that Keyes could book a flight from Alaska, go to another state, but then once he got to the other state and his flight landed, he would find a rental car company and use a rental car to drive thousands of miles away to a completely different state than what his flight had actually landed in. So I feel like that was more confusing than I anticipated. So let me break it down, because it blows my mind that he even thought this far ahead to do this. He would buy an airline ticket, board the plane in Alaska, get off the plane in a different state, rent a car, drive thousands of miles away to a completely different state from where the plane had landed, dig up a kill kit, and use it. Now, he did this that way if he was ever suspected of anything, his airline tickets would put him in whatever state the plane had landed in, and not in the actual state where the murder had happened. Like, for example, he may take a flight to Chicago, get off the plane in Chicago, rent a car, and then drive 15 and a half hours from Chicago to Vermont, where he would have a kill kit buried in Vermont, and then he would go murder somebody. But with his handy-dandy plane ticket, it looked like he'd only ever been in Chicago. So unfortunately, he was extremely smart. So he'd drive thousands of miles away from wherever his plane had landed to unbury his kill kit and use it. And once the kill kit had been dug up, it was basically just like whoever he saw first was probably who he was going to kill. Unless, of course, the first person he saw broke one of his own kill rules. Because, yeah, he had kill rules. So essentially, whoever he laid eyes on first was his intended target. So these kill rules that Keyes had for himself, let's go over those real quick, because that's also interesting. So one of his biggest rules was not to kill people in the same city, state, or town that he lived in. Not to kill someone that he had any kind of personal connection or ties to whatsoever. So no one he knew personally. A few more of his rules were to always pick houses at random, to always choose houses with no dogs, because, obviously. Another big rule was no houses with kids. So if he saw a bike or a playhouse or a swing set or whatever in the yard, that house was no longer an option. He would never kill moms of young kids or women that he saw with kids, which I think is so weird, because young kids or adult kids, either way, that's still someone's mom. I don't know. That's got to be serial killer logic, which is maybe why I don't understand it. But Keyes did later tell investigators when he was arrested that after his daughter was born, for whatever reason, that he knew right then that he would never be able to kill a child. Which is so weird to me, because most serial killers are psychopaths or sociopaths, which causes them to not be able to feel remorse, shame, guilt, like any of those emotions. And normally they can't connect with other people on an emotional level like this. Like, their brains normally aren't wired to feel empathy, sympathy, remorse, whatever. But after Keyes was arrested, he was talked to by multiple different mental health professionals, and no diagnosis was ever made on him as far as being a psychopath or sociopath. So I've always thought it was so weird that he was able to connect with his own daughter on a deep enough level that it would make it impossible for him to kill someone else's child, or even the mom to someone else's child. But another big rule was that he wouldn't choose your house if your house and your garage were not connected to one another. So if your shed or your garage was in the backyard or just not connected to your house, then you were safe. And he did this because he was smart enough to think things through as far in advance to know that he was more likely to be seen or caught if he had to come out of your house to get in your shed or garage in order to steal your car to be able to use it as his own getaway car. So he knew that he was more likely to be seen or spotted if he had to walk around the outside of your house after he'd just killed you in the middle of the night just to find your garage and break into it. He knew that there would be a higher risk of eyewitnesses seeing him if the garage wasn't connected to the house. So if the garage was connected to the house, all he'd have to do is open the door inside of your house that leads into the garage, and then he would basically be home free at that point. I told y'all, he's pretty smart, and he's nothing like any other serial killer that I know of. And then probably one of the scariest things that Keyes told the FBI after he was arrested was that since he worked in construction, that he could just kind of stand outside of your house and pretty much be able to tell the exact layout of the inside of your house. He would kind of be able to tell where each room would be inside of your house, which in turn made it easier for him to navigate through your house without your knowledge, because he already pretty much knew the exact layout of where each room in your house would be located. Even if he'd never been inside of your house before that, he could tell all of that just by standing outside of your house for a few seconds. Because just him standing outside looking at your house for 3 minutes, he could tell you where the kitchen was likely located, where the living room was most likely located, where the master bedroom, the laundry room would be located, and he would even be able to pretty accurately estimate how many rooms he would have to navigate through in order to get to the master bedroom where his intended target would be, sleeping or, whatever. And all of that by simply standing in the road in front of your house for 90 seconds, which completely freaks me out. Now, something else that Keyes would later tell investigators after he was arrested is that he could turn his killer persona off and on like a light switch. That 1 minute he could be playing hair and makeup with his daughter or drinking a beer at a friend's house during a barbecue, and then the second that he got the urge to kill, he could turn that loving, fun, friendly side of himself off and just go straight into kill mode. Which I also find so strange that he was able to be such a normal, friend, dad, neighbor, businessman, boyfriend, all of these things, and then bam, he just wants to kill someone, so he books a flight. Some more of Keyes' rules were that he wouldn't kill dogs, which is something that we see pretty often in any kind of murders, whether it be like a family annihilator or serial killer or whatever. Like, they all have this same weird rule about not hurting dogs or animals. Like, there are even cases of men that have killed their entire family and then, like, taken off to start a new life, and they take their old family dog with them when they leave after they murdered their entire family. So I feel like that's not really too much out of the normal. I feel like that's pretty normal for most serial killers or murderers. Now, while Keyes was on these murdering sprees, he would usually rob banks either before or after the murders, and he would start random fires before or after the murders too. So I don't know if he was robbing banks and setting fires to kind of like curb the urge to kill someone, or if it was like a way to either like hype himself up for the murder or a way to decompress after the murder, or if he did it as a way to just draw attention from law enforcement to other areas besides the murder scene. And we still don't know for sure why he robbed banks and set fires before or after the murders, but the fact that Keyes was never even on local law enforcement or the FBI's radar for the bank robberies, setting fires and arson, or killing people for that matter. So he did later admit to using fire as a way to cover up some of these murders, but that doesn't really seem to me like the only reason that he was committing arson and starting random ass fires, but I don't know. Now, before we get into Keyes' last crime, let's get into his first one. Now, there isn't much known about this first crime except for what Keyes told the FBI after his arrest. Keyes would later go on to tell police, after he was finally captured, caught, and arrested, that the first crime that he ever committed was before his daughter was born, and that this crime happened in the summer sometime between 1996 and 1998. Now, he told investigators that he'd abducted a girl from a campsite while she was tubing with a group of friends down the Deschutes River. He'd taken this poor girl into the bathroom of the campsite and sexually assaulted her. After Keyes sexually assaulted this girl, he let her go, and he sent her back down the river on the tube that she had been using before he abducted her. Keyes also said that he never intended on letting this girl go, and that he would have guessed that she was somewhere between the ages of 14 to 18 years old. So I'm sure this girl probably tried to reason with Keyes and get personal with him in hopes that it would make it harder for him to, murder somebody that he felt like he connected with. But whatever she did, it worked. So he allegedly let this first victim go. And this assault has likely never been reported to law enforcement since they still haven't been able to identify his first victim. This first assault happened when Keyes was living with his baby mama Rachel at the reservation in Washington. Keyes also told authorities that he committed 4 more murders during this time, but FBI and investigators believe that it was likely more like 5 victims and not 4. When investigators asked why he'd committed these first few murders, Keyes kind of responded and told them something along the lines of, well, once you start, there's really nothing else like it. Keyes then went on to tell them that he'd only committed these first 4 or 5 murders because he lived in a boring town. Like, okay, sir, get a hobby, build some shit, start a garden, draw a picture, read a book, or hell, start a podcast. Really anything besides rape and murder would be fine. So that was his first known victim, and there are probably a lot more victims that we'll never know about or actually even be able to connect to Keyes. So now I want to take you on a journey. Let's all go way back to 2012. Because this is when Keyes would finally make a mistake that would end his criminal career. Keyes had been on a 14 to 16 year long killing rampage and no one even knew his name. Keyes had never even been so much as questioned in relation to any crime up until this point. He'd never been questioned for murder, or rape, or bank robbery, or arson. Not one single thing. He wasn't even so much as a blip on law enforcement's radar. That was until he finally made a mistake in 2012. On February 1st, 2012, Keyes broke what he described as his biggest rule. So he broke rule number 1. And when he did, it would cause him to become a name that everyone in law enforcement would learn. On February 1st, 2012, at about 8 o'clock in the evening, Keyes pulled into a tiny coffee stand called the Common Grounds, which I love that name for a coffee stand. Now, the common ground was only about 4 miles from Keys' house where he lived with his current girlfriend and his daughter Lacey. This coffee stand is tiny. It's almost like a tiny shed that you would walk up to a window and order your drinks. So, it's not even a big enough place to have tables for you to sit down at. You couldn't actually walk inside of this coffee shop. And I'll post pictures of the coffee shop on social media. That way you can get a better idea of how small it actually was. Now, the Common Grounds coffee shop sat in a parking lot of a bigger store. So, picture a Walmart parking lot with a tiny coffee stand the size of an ATM machine, just sitting in the parking lot somewhere. But instead of an ATM machine, it's a tiny coffee shop. So, Keys pulls into the parking lot of this bigger store and he walks to the Common Grounds coffee stand at about 8 p.m. The barista working the closing shift that night was 18-year-old Samantha Koenig. And Samantha was gorgeous. She had tons of friends. She was loved by everybody who knew her. Samantha lived with her dad and her boyfriend, and they all lived in Anchorage, Alaska also. So, rule number 1, don't kill people in close proximity to you. He broke his own rule, and thank God he did. Now, on the surveillance camera for the coffee shop, you can see Keys walk up to the window and order a coffee. He orders an Americano. And you can also see that he's wearing a ski mask, which would be a red flag to me. But then I remembered that they're in Alaska and it is literally freezing cold there. Which also made me remember that not everyone lives in Satan's butthole like I do. So a ski mask isn't something that would be alarming in Alaska. Keys ordered his Americano coffee and you can see Samantha start to make his drink. And at first she's facing away from Keys with her back turned to him. And then when she turns around to face him again, her entire body language completely changes. You can see her with her hands in the air and she starts kind of walking backwards away from the window where you would place your drink order at. And her body language is literally speaking volumes in this surveillance footage. Keys pulled a gun on Samantha and then he ordered her to give him all the money that the coffee stand had in the register. So, of course, she did. Samantha handed Keys every dollar that tiny coffee shop had. Keys then told Samantha to turn off all the lights inside the coffee shop. But while Samantha is cutting off all the lights like he told her to, Keys literally ninja dives through the small window where he had just been standing ordering his coffee seconds before this. So you can see on the surveillance footage that Keys had jumped into the coffee stand through that small window while Samantha had her back facing towards him, turning the lights off. And now that he was inside of the coffee stand with Samantha, he was able to force her hands behind her back where he zip-tied them together. Keys forced Samantha out of the door of the coffee stand, then he would later tell investigators that Samantha had put up quite a fight, and that she had almost even escaped from him once he'd gotten her outside. But once Keys had gotten Samantha outside, he told investigators that she had taken off running, which had kind of caught him off guard. Keys was able to run after Samantha where he did eventually catch up with her. He tackled her onto the ground and then forced her to get inside of his girlfriend's white Chevrolet truck. So he'd literally already robbed Samantha at gunpoint. Now he's kidnapping her, and he's doing all this while he's driving his girlfriend's truck. What a winner. So once Keys had Samantha in the truck, he drove around Anchorage with her in the truck for a while. He was trying to contemplate and figure out what he was going to do with Samantha from here. Keys even admitted to investigators later that he had told Samantha while they were driving around that he was only kidnapping her for ransom money, which he said made Samantha feel a little bit more at ease. Samantha tried to calm herself down and just cooperate with him in order to be able to get away from him. And this is all from Keys' account of what happened and what he said. So he really made Samantha believe that she stood a chance at making it out of this situation alive when he knew full well that he wasn't going to let her go. He really is one sick bastard. Now, Samantha thinks that if she just cooperates with him, that she'll be fine. But the whole time that they're driving around, Samantha's telling Keys, my family doesn't have money like that. We don't have just mounds of money laying around. And Keys said that he tried to assure Samantha that everyone in town would kind of pitch in and that the town would probably come together and help out with the money once they learned that she had been kidnapped and was being held for ransom. So he's making it out just like, oh, don't worry, everyone in town will pitch in and you'll be fine. And again, we only know all of this and what was said between Samantha and Keys because later when Keys was arrested, he told police, FBI, detectives, and investigators all the information that they needed for Samantha's case. And we'll talk more about why he did that later. And then at 8:33 p.m., Samantha's live-in boyfriend, Dwayne, had already left his job, and he was pulling into the coffee stand where Samantha worked to pick her up after her closing shift. So Samantha's boyfriend, Dwayne, is pulling into the parking lot of the coffee stand to pick Samantha up at the same time that Samantha is riding around with Keys. So by the time Samantha's boyfriend got to the coffee shop, Samantha had already been kidnapped and forced into Keys' girlfriend's truck. So no one was inside the coffee shop now, and Samantha's boyfriend noticed that all the lights in the coffee shop were already off. He also noticed that there weren't any customers in line waiting on their drinks, and there weren't any cars in the parking lot. He also didn't see Samantha anywhere around. So Dwayne just kind of heads back to the house where he and Samantha lived with Samantha's dad. And at this point, there weren't any red flags going off in Dwayne's mind. Not yet, anyway. Dwayne kind of figured that Samantha had caught a ride from someone who was leaving work at maybe one of the bigger stores, because the coffee shop sat in a parking lot of a bigger store. Aside from that, this was a small town. Anyone could have stopped for a coffee that night before closing time and offered Samantha a ride home. It could have been a neighbor or a friend or an old teacher or someone from church. It literally could have been anyone. So Dwayne just kind of figured that Samantha would already be home when he got there. But on Dwayne's way home, he's trying to call Samantha and text her just to check and make sure that she's okay. She's not answering the phone and she's not texting back. Now, Keys later said that he never had any intentions of letting Samantha go, even if he got the ransom money from her family. But that he figured that telling her that would be the easiest way to get her to cooperate and to do what he said. Keys eventually ended up driving back to the coffee shop because Samantha had left her phone there, because she had been taken against her will and forced into a borrowed truck. So Keys went back to the scene of the crime, and as long as he's been doing this and getting away with it, you would think that he would be a little bit smarter than that. But thank God he wasn't. Anyway, so he drives them back to the coffee shop and he grabs Samantha's cell phone. And he did this for a reason. He didn't just drive back to the scene of the crime and grab her phone for shits and giggles. No, he went back and got her phone so that he could text Samantha's boyfriend, Dwayne, from Samantha's own cell phone. And he was going to do this and send these text messages as if they were being sent from Samantha. So Keys gets Samantha's phone from the coffee shop and he texts Samantha's boyfriend, Dwayne. Keys sent a text to Dwayne from Samantha's phone at 11:24 p.m. So Samantha had been abducted from the coffee shop by Keys at around 8 p.m. And this text was sent at 11:24 p.m. So I'm sure that by the time that Dwayne got this text from Samantha's phone, that both he and her dad were probably already starting to panic and freak out. I'm sure that they freaked out together at about 9 p.m. Right after Samantha didn't come home and half an hour after she should have. And that's like I said, I'm sure that they were expecting her to be dropped off by a neighbor or a friend or, whatever. I'm sure they weren't thinking this. So the text that Keys sent from Samantha's phone to her boyfriend Dwayne said, "F you asshole. I know what you did. I'm going to spend a couple of days with friends. Need time to think. Plan acting weird. Let Dad know." I'm going to read that again and emphasize how stupid it is, okay? F you asshole. It's literally one F and a capital U. I know what you did. What did he do? I'm going to spend a couple of days with friends. That's something she would have planned and not done spur of the moment. Need time to think. Plan acting weird. So he's basically letting her boyfriend know shit's not going to be right. And then let Dad know. First of all, a lot of that message doesn't make sense. Plan acting weird. If you're going to message something like that, you should probably make it at least make sense for anybody reading it. Now, as soon as Dwayne got this message, he knew immediately that this was not Samantha texting him. So Dwayne takes his phone into where Samantha's dad was, and he shows the message to Samantha's dad. And once Samantha's dad, James, read the message, he also immediately said that couldn't have been Sam that had sent that message. Both of the men knew that wasn't the way that Samantha texted, and that it wasn't her either. Like, everyone has a way that they text. Some people spell the letter U instead of, like, spelling out Y-O-U. Like, I do certain things when I'm texting. I leave out the O in the word you. I leave out the O or the E in the words no or new. Like, we all have a certain way of texting. And if you text with somebody all the time, you know how they text. You know the style that they use, etc. And this wasn't the way that Samantha texted. Both of them knew it. And then at 11:53 p.m., Dwayne got another text from Samantha's phone number. And all this text said was F-U. And again, it's a capital F and a capital U. And what we find out later is that Samantha and Dwayne had actually been kind of arguing back and forth earlier that day through text messages. So Keys had to have, like, gone through her phone to see that they had already been kind of arguing back and forth earlier that day through text messages. Like, he must have. And I don't know if this was like a serious argument or if the couple was just kind of bickering back and forth earlier that day. Either way, it doesn't really matter. But Keys had to have gone through her phone. And I say that because of the I know what you did part of the text. That makes me think that he's already gone through and read the messages that Dwayne and Samantha had been sending back and forth earlier. So Samantha's dad, James, and her boyfriend, Dwayne, they just kind of wait around all night waiting on Samantha to come home. And I'll explain why they did that here in just a few. And then finally, the next morning on February 2nd, the first thing that Samantha's dad, James, did was got in touch with the owner of the Common Grounds coffee shop where Samantha worked. The footage from the surveillance camera is, of course, how we know all the details about Samantha's abduction. And once the footage is looked through, local law enforcement got in touch with the FBI. Now, the FBI is basically the equivalent of bringing the big guns. So once the FBI showed up, they were able to get surveillance footage from the bigger stores and shops that were in close proximity to the Common Grounds coffee shop. And of course, that bigger store that the coffee shop sat in the parking lot of. That was probably going to be their most helpful footage in this search for Samantha. Because, like I've said, this coffee shop that Samantha worked at sat inside of a much bigger parking lot for a much bigger store. So it wasn't until February 3rd when the FBI was able to gain access to the footage from the bigger store, the one that the coffee shop sat in the parking lot of. And they had to go through the chain of command to get things done by the book, so we're at about 48 hours into Samantha being abducted at this point, when the FBI is finally able to get the footage from the bigger store that shared the parking lot with the coffee shop. So once the FBI got a hold of the surveillance footage, you guessed it, it's super grainy, kind of fuzzy, and hard to make out. And all you can really see is Samantha coming out of the coffee shop with a man behind her. And you can see that the two got into a white truck. So FBI was able to break down and estimate the make and model of the white truck thanks to the surveillance footage. And the FBI believed that the truck was between a 1999 or a 2007 white Chevrolet truck. So, of course, local police and FBI start looking into every white Chevy between the years of 1999 and 2007. So, of course, local police and the FBI start looking into every white Chevy between the years of 1999 and 2007 that met the color, year, make, and model criteria, but it's Alaska, where literally everyone drives a four-wheel drive truck. I mean, you have to have a vehicle that can get through snow and ice, and I'm sure they haul stuff all the time in Alaska. Like firewood or whatever else Alaskans have to haul around, I don't know. But basically everyone has a truck, and a white Chevy isn't very flashy. It's the exact opposite of flashy, actually. So law enforcement and investigators are combing through thousands of white Chevrolet trucks, and before I keep going, let's go back and I'll tell you what was going on back at Key's house with Samantha on the night that she was taken at gunpoint and forced to go with Keys. Because like I said, I just gave you probably 48 hours of law enforcement activity after she'd been missing. So now let me tell you what was actually happening back at Keys' house. So Keys and Samantha went back to the coffee shop to grab her phone that she'd left behind. Keys then drove Samantha back to his own house, where he walked her into the shed that was sitting right next to the house where he lived with his current girlfriend and where his daughter Lacey was inside asleep. Keys told Samantha to hand over her debit card, and this is when Samantha told him that she didn't actually have her debit card with her, that it was inside of her boyfriend Dwayne's truck. So Keys really didn't think this through, sending these text messages telling Samantha's boyfriend that she was taking off for a few days. Like, she doesn't even have her debit card, so she wouldn't actually be able to go anywhere. Not without her debit card, at least. At least think things through. So Samantha tells Keys that her debit card is in her boyfriend's truck and that she and Dwayne have a joint account and they combine their money. Keys then tells Samantha to give him her home address so that he can go to her house and get her debit card. Keys pulls up MapQuest on the computer. Shout out to all of us who remember printing out 8 pages of directions because we couldn't afford a GPS. And of course because phones didn't have GPS yet. So Keys pulls up MapQuest and he has Samantha point out her house on the map. He then has her point out where on the property her boyfriend's truck should be parked at. Once Samantha did this, Keys printed off the directions to Samantha's home address, and while he's gone, he's going to leave Samantha in the shed by herself. But before Keys left Samantha alone in the shed, he told her that she may as well go ahead and stop screaming for help because he would have his police scanner with him the entire time, and that if anyone heard her screaming and called the police, that he would be able to get back to the shed that he was keeping her in and kill her before the police ever had time to show up to save her. Now, he still has her tied up, and he's got her, neck chained to something in the garage or in the shed to keep her still. So I would imagine that Samantha was probably just sitting there in silence, hoping that she would make it out of this alive. And before Keys left to head to Samantha's house to grab her debit card out of her boyfriend's truck, he turned the radio in the shed up on full volume. And he did this so that if she did scream, the music and the noise would drown out her screams. Keys did leave, though, and he did go to Samantha's house. So now Keys is outside of Samantha's home address, and he's attempting to get into Dwayne's truck to get Samantha's ID and debit card out. And Dwayne actually heard the noise outside of the house, which I'm sure Dwayne was just assuming, maybe this is Samantha coming home, or maybe this is some random regular burglar. But Dwayne goes outside and he sees someone just rummaging through his truck, and he runs towards Keys. But by the time that Dwayne made it over to the truck, Keys was long gone. He had just kind of vanished into the darkness. So he was that close to catching Keys. But could you imagine being that close to Israel Keys and not even knowing it? So Dwayne and Keys barely missed each other, and sadly, Keys was just a tad bit faster than Dwayne. Keys then drove back to his own house where he still had Samantha tied up in the shed that sat right beside of his own house with her debit card in hand. I even read in a few places that Keys went inside of his house and checked on his daughter and girlfriend before he poured himself a glass of wine and went back out to the shed where he had Samantha tied up by the neck. So he poured himself a glass of wine and checked on his own daughter and his girlfriend right before he raped and strangled Samantha Koenig to death. Samantha Koenig was murdered in the early morning hours of February 2nd in 2012, and Keys just left Samantha's body in the shed while he went inside to wake up his daughter and gather their suitcases, because the Keys family was heading out for a cruise, and they were leaving out of New Orleans that morning. Yeah, you heard me right. He had just sexually assaulted and murdered an 18-year-old girl for absolutely no reason at all. And right afterwards, he's gathering up his luggage to head out on a cruise ship. Could you imagine learning later that you had been on a cruise ship with Israel Keys? Because I think that would just ruin me after all the shit that came out about him later. So, February 2nd, 2012, Keys and his family left for vacation with Samantha's body still in the shed at Keys' house. He and his family left for the cruise on February 2nd, and they didn't return home to Anchorage until February 17th. So, a 15-day cruise and all of that, while Samantha's body was being stored in a deep freezer, still inside of the shed at Keys' house. Now, he did later say that he didn't really know what to do with Samantha's body while they were gone, so the deep freezer just sounded like the best option. And in Alaska, it's usually cold, or at least that's the way they make it seem on TV. So, by Keys putting her body in the deep freezer, it did slow down the process of decomposition. But I feel like the cold temperatures of Alaska would have done the same thing if he would have just left her in the shed and not put her in the deep freezer. But, I don't know. I don't kill people for funsies, so I don't know. Now, meanwhile, Samantha's boyfriend Dwayne and her dad have no idea where she is. They have no idea what's happening to her or if she's even okay. Keyes had put Samantha's body in the deep freezer inside of the shed and just left her there while he was gone on vacation. And of course, police have questioned Samantha's boyfriend Dwayne about why he hadn't reported Samantha as a missing person when he showed up at her job and she wasn't there. And basically, Dwayne told them that he had always been under the impression that in order to report an adult as a missing person, that they had to be missing under, mysterious circumstances for at least 24 hours. And you always hear families talk about how they try to report an adult loved one as a missing person and the police tell them that adults are allowed to go missing or allowed to do things and not tell people where they are. And Dwayne thought that this was like a law or something, like that he could not report her missing for at least 24 hours, and that's just not true. Make noise, raise hell, and report your people missing if you feel like they are in danger. Now, police had also talked to Samantha's dad, James, multiple times, and they were just absolutely no closer to finding Samantha. And in the time that Keyes had been on vacation, Samantha's dad, James, was making sure that everyone in Anchorage knew what Samantha looked like, and he was making sure to spread awareness about her case. James had gone to the public, he had talked on news stations and media outlets, and he was organizing search parties, and he'd even put together a candlelit vigil on the 10th day in the search for Samantha. And I found a quote during this time from Samantha's dad, James, and he said, quote, "Please, just help me find my daughter. I don't know if my daughter is being fed, taken care of, if she's still alive, or even if she's getting any sleep." And that just will break your heart. So once Keyes gets back from his long-ass vacation, he's unpacking his luggage, settling back into regular life, and then he decides that now's probably a good time to write a ransom note to Samantha's family. Now, keep in mind that Samantha had been murdered weeks before he had gotten back from his vacation, so for whatever reason, Keyes thought a ransom note was a good idea now, just all of a sudden. So Keyes starts working on this ransom note that he's going to write to Samantha's family. And before he does that, he realizes that Samantha's family is probably going to ask for proof of life, especially after this long of not hearing from her kidnapper. So, what can he possibly do? Well, Keyes pulled Samantha's lifeless dead body out of the deep freezer, and he started the most elaborate ransom plan that I've ever heard of. He'd gotten a newspaper from earlier that same morning, and he propped it up against Samantha's lifeless body and snapped a picture. So, this ransom picture looks like Samantha because it is Samantha. And it looks like she's holding this newspaper with that day's date on it. In the most ransom cases, this is a good indicator that the victim is still alive. You have the victim holding the paper with that day's date on it. They're alive, awake, and holding the newspaper. And normally, they have the victim hold the newspaper with that day's date on it to prove that the picture wasn't taken weeks ago. So in most cases, this would be a good sign that Samantha was still alive. But Keyes is more sick and twisted than anyone else I've ever read about or done research on. And in most ransom cases, you have to prove that the person being held against their will is still alive. Once the family receives proof of life, then the criminal gets their money and they return the family member back to you alive and well. And that could not have been further from the truth in Samantha's case. She had been dead for weeks at this point, and Keyes was just out living his best tropical life. But Keyes had tried so hard to make this picture of Samantha look lifelike that he'd actually gone so far as to sew Samantha's eyes open with a needle and thread just to be able to take this picture. And in his attempt to convince Samantha's family and law enforcement that she was still alive when this picture was taken. Keyes had even done Samantha's hair and makeup along with sewing her eyes open to make law enforcement and Samantha's family believe that she was still alive. Now, Keyes took this picture of Samantha with a Polaroid camera. And then he scanned that picture onto a sheet of regular printer paper, probably in hopes of distorting the image so that it wouldn't be as noticeable that Samantha wasn't actually alive. So by scanning the Polaroid picture onto a sheet of regular printer paper, it made the picture more fuzzy and more hard to make out actual details. So now there's a picture of Samantha holding a newspaper on one side of a piece of printer paper. And on the back side of that same piece of paper is where Keyes would type up the ransom note to Samantha's family. So the picture's on one side of the printer paper and the ransom note had been typed on to the back side of the printer paper. Now this is when Keyes got Samantha's phone back out and sent yet another text message to Samantha's boyfriend Dwayne. And again, every time Keys is sending Samantha's boyfriend a text, he's sending those texts from Samantha's phone. So this text message to Samantha's boyfriend Dwayne read, quote, Connor Park, sign under pic of Albert. Ain't she pretty? And I'm going to read that again. Connor Park, sign under pic of Albert. Ain't she pretty? Who the hell is Albert? And what does this ransom note even mean? Okay, we'll get there. But keep in mind that this text was sent 23 days after he had originally abducted Samantha from the coffee shop. So this ransom note also said that Keys wanted $30,000 deposited into Samantha's bank account. And again, he's asking to have the money put into Samantha's bank account because he'd already broken into Dwayne's truck on the night that he'd taken Samantha, and he had been able to get her debit card and ID out of Dwayne's truck before he had to flee into the woods once Dwayne started running and chasing after him. So Keys had Samantha's debit card, and he's asking for $30,000 worth of ransom money to be added to Samantha's account, which she also jointly shared with her boyfriend Dwayne. So I'm sure at this point, police had probably already asked that Dwayne not use the debit card linked to the account for anything. And they probably asked him not to do that so that they could track any money trail that the kidnapper may leave behind for them. So naturally, police are still working the case, and as we all know, the first and most likely suspects in these cases are the people closest to the victim. And police are looking hard into Samantha's dad, James, and her boyfriend, Dwayne. And they're really the only viable suspects for Samantha's case because, again, Keys was nowhere on the radar of law enforcement at this point. But his luck was about to change, thankfully. So this case was taking place in 2012, and I was curious as to why the FBI and local law enforcement weren't able to track these text messages that had been coming from Samantha's phone. And as it turns out, they could trace, track, or ping your phone's location if the battery was in the phone or if the phone was powered on. So Keys was only turning the phone on long enough to send these text messages, and then he would immediately shut it off or remove the battery. So the FBI and local law enforcement weren't able to trace or track or ping Samantha's phone because it was only ever on for a short amount of time before Keys would turn it off and remove the battery. So FBI got word about this last text message that was sent from Samantha's phone about Connor Park, the sign under pic of Albert, ain't she pretty, whatever. And they immediately raced to Connor Park, which Connor Park is actually a dog park in Anchorage. And this dog park is only like 5 minutes from the coffee shop where Samantha had been abducted from. So when the FBI show up to Connor Park, there was a dog flyer stapled to a tree at Connor Park Dog Park. And this missing dog's name was Albert. So ding, 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 that explains at least who Albert is. So now behind the missing dog flyer of Albert the missing dog, there was a Ziploc bag that had also been tacked to the tree, and in that bag was a picture. It was the picture of Samantha that Keys had taken with her eyes sewn open and the ransom note printed and typed out on the back of the page. Now, the ransom note did also say that the ransom money probably wouldn't be used in Alaska because, that would be pretty dumb of him. Yet he felt the need to point that fact out, and he basically was just letting law enforcement know that he probably wouldn't be using the card in Alaska, but that he would definitely be using the ransom money that they had deposited into Samantha's account, though. Just not in Alaska. Like, he's so dumb to have gotten away with so many crimes for so long. So the picture that he had taken was proof enough for Samantha's family and law enforcement that she was still alive, and they added the $30,000 that Keys had demanded in ransom money to Samantha's account. And once Keys got the ransom money, he went back to his house where he would then go on to dismember 18-year-old Samantha Koenig's body. After he dismembered her body, he had taken her dismembered body and dumped it into a frozen lake somewhere near Anchorage. But thankfully, Keys just wasn't able to let that $30,000 worth of ransom money go, because that small amount of ransom would inevitably be the reason that Keys would finally be caught and captured. But it wasn't very long after the ransom money was deposited into Samantha's account that pings from Samantha's debit card would go crazy. On February 29th, 2012, at 10:13 p.m. in Alaska, at an Alaskan USA bank, there was an attempt to withdraw money from Samantha's account. The bank where the attempted withdrawal was made at was only a few short blocks away from the coffee shop where Samantha had been abducted. And then on the same night, February 29th, 2012, there was a second attempt made to withdraw money from Samantha's account, this time at 11:56 p.m. at a Denali, Alaskan Federal Credit Union. And after a few short minutes after the second attempt, a third attempt was also made to withdraw money, this time at a different Alaskan USA bank. So the FBI was on it. They were tracking every attempt, and when the FBI was able to get a hold of the first bank that the withdrawal attempt was made at, they saw a 2007 Nissan Xterra in the parking lot of the same bank that the first transaction was attempted. Of course, banks have more cameras than anywhere. And the first attempt was made at 10:13 p.m., so I highly doubt there were very many cars in the parking lot, if any. And if they were, they weren't there at the same exact time, this very specific time. They were also able to see on the footage a man wearing a ski mask at the ATM. And they were able to pull that from the footage from the first and last bank that he stopped at. I guess Keyes really didn't think much about the ATMs having cameras or something. I don't know, that's always been a weird thing to me that he would even try to get money out of her account at an ATM. He could have went to a grocery store and just got cash back. But he did, which is good. Another thing that Keyes didn't really think about either was the fact that local law enforcement and FBI were looking at comments that were being made under news outlets who were, posting about Samantha's case online. But they were looking at these comments. And when they did, they found a few different comments from someone using the name Israel, which was also so stupid of him, but again, thank God for stupid small miracles, I guess. So the first comment appeared on March 3rd at 2:19 a.m. on a KTVA news article. And this comment said, "Nothing surprises me anymore. For every action, there is a reaction. And playing with other people's emotions, male or female, is a very vile thing. Also, I have to say, people who portray an image or a personality trait up front that isn't that type of person that they really are, you're only hurting yourselves." Now, mind you, he's using his actual name and posting these comments under news outlets who are reporting on Samantha's case. And he's doing that as if police aren't going to be looking into these comments and the people who are posting them. Now, another comment showed up 2 days later on March 5th on a different news article, but with the same station. This comment was really weird. It goes on about, owning a disgusting strip club and, what happens when the public's doing all the work on these cases and, yada yada. It doesn't even make sense enough for me to read it. There was also a third comment posted to, another article in the same news station. And this comment read, quote, "I hate to say this, at this point, there's no hope. And I would also like to point out that innocent until proven guilty. Stupid people like to blame others because he sounds like a prime suspect without any proof that he actually did it. And she wasn't so innocent either. The dumb bitch played with others' emotions and with this guy, and she had a boyfriend, so you have to wonder about the consequences. I really wish she is found and perhaps learned her lesson from now on." And that last comment, I think he's starting to get upset that local law enforcement and FBI are mainly looking at Samantha's dad, James, and her boyfriend, Dwayne. And he's starting to want, recognition for what he's done. He's a delusional, crazy person, so there's no telling what he's actually talking about, especially with, talking to other guys while she had a boyfriend. He could have seen her talking to a customer at work, and in his head, she must have been doing something wrong. But, that's just me, speculating. This also makes me wonder if Keyes had left comments like this on any of his other victims' online news coverage, of their cases. It's not very far-fetched to think that this probably wasn't his first time doing this. And Keyes himself said later on that he would often go online and look up the news coverage of his older crimes and murders that he'd committed, and he did this when he got bored, or when it was late at night and he'd had too much to drink. So I'm sure if someone did some, serious digging and went down a rabbit hole of Israel Keyes' known victims, there are probably more comments just like these. And it was finally on May 7th that the FBI shifted their focus from Samantha's dad, James, and her boyfriend, Dwayne, to whoever it was that had been trying to withdraw money from Samantha's account. Now, when this withdrawal attempt was made, it was made in Wilcox, Arizona. So finally, FBI and local law enforcement could say without a shadow of a doubt that both of Samantha's dad and her boyfriend that they were still in Alaska and that they were actually, in fact, not in Arizona where the last withdrawal attempt was made. Local law enforcement and FBI were contacting other police departments in other states after this attempted withdrawal in Arizona. So now they're reaching out to every state to try to let them know that if Samantha's card pinged in their state, that state would need to send local state police officers to be dispatched ASAP so that they could try to catch this guy. And as soon as this withdrawal attempt was made in Arizona, the withdrawal in Arizona did go through. He did get money. I don't know why I keep saying attempt. So as soon as this withdrawal in Arizona was made, Arizona police were sent out to the ATM where Keyes had successfully withdrawn money from Samantha's account. And the Arizona police had shown up right after this withdrawal was made. But there was no sign of anyone around when they showed up. So Arizona police pulled the security footage from the ATM that Keyes had used. And when they did, they saw a man in a ski mask. Okay, so now he's in Arizona. A ski mask is probably the last thing that you would ever need in Arizona. So this struck everybody as odd. Red flags, y'all, red flags. Now, behind the man in the ski mask was a white Ford Focus sitting idle in the background. And they can see the car, they can see the man, but the man's wearing a ski mask, and the car doesn't really do much good unless you can see like some sort of super distinct feature, like a caved-in door or a missing bumper or a different panel door. But there was nothing distinct about this car or this man for that matter. And it would only be about an hour and a half later when a second successful withdrawal was made in Lordsburg, New Mexico, which was about 80 miles from where the first withdrawal was made in Arizona. And once again, FBI reached out to New Mexico police, and the local New Mexico police rushed to the ATM where Samantha's card had just been used. And New Mexico police had missed Keyes pulling out of that ATM parking lot by literal minutes. So this time, though, the FBI alerted the DEA, who were able to review agency camera footage from cameras going down I-10, going either into or out of New Mexico. So now they have access to camera footage and cameras that allow them to see vehicles traveling in or out of New Mexico on the interstate. Now, with this new footage that they had access to, the FBI were able to track the last 5 minutes of the first withdrawal in Arizona. And there were only 2 white Ford Focuses that they were able to find that they could make out the license plates for that had been in a 5-minute frame of the time that the first withdrawal was made. And both of these white Ford Focuses were registered to a rental car company called Avis Budget Group Incorporated. Now, the next step for the FBI would be to start pulling these rental agreements for these 2 white Ford Focuses to see who had rented them, because they had only been able to find 2 cars that matched the description of the car that had been caught on almost all of the ATM security footage since he left Arizona. But that was going to take time to break the confidentiality types of clauses that you sign when you rent a car. And in order for FBI to be able to get started pulling names and birthdays and information and stuff like that from these rental agreements for the people that had rented these 2 cars. So they were working on that, and in the meantime, the very next day, after the first 3 ATM withdrawals were made, another ATM withdrawal was made, and this time it was made over 900 miles away. So he had already moved 900 miles from where he had last withdrawn money at in New Mexico. And he had just withdrawn it the day before. So this last withdrawal was made in Humble, Texas. Now, after Humble, Texas, it would be another 2 days later before another withdrawal was made. This time the withdrawal was made in Shepherd, Texas. So whether Keyes realized it or not, he was essentially leaving a Hansel and Gretel type of breadcrumb trail for the FBI to follow right where he was going. And they now know that he's driving a white Ford Focus from that rental car company. The FBI had already tracked Keyes from Alaska to Arizona to New Mexico and then all the way to Texas. And with that, the FBI put out a BOLO, or a be on the lookout for these white Ford Focuses, and these BOLOs were sent to include the license plate, the descriptions, stuff like that. They were sent to Eastern Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. And by March 13th, police and FBI had been able to pull one of the rental agreements for the white Ford Focus, and luckily for that driver, the FBI had been able to kind of clear him pretty quickly, or them, I guess, pretty quickly, and now they're moving on to the next Ford Focus. So that only left one rental agreement to be pulled and to be gone through. And with the bolo in all the surrounding states, police and FBI were just kind of living on a prayer until they could get the other rental agreement pulled and figure out who the driver of the second Ford Focus was. And ta-da, just like that, there was an officer on duty who spotted a white Ford Focus with the matching license plate and state and numbers at a hotel in Lufkin, Texas. So this police just kind of staked out the hotel and the car and kind of waited on the driver to get back in the car to be able to make a traffic stop. Now, luckily for that officer, they didn't have to wait very long because about 30 minutes later, a skinny, dark-haired man came out of one of the hotel rooms. This man threw his bags and luggage into the back of the car, and then he jumped into the driver's seat of the white Ford Focus. The car left the parking lot of the hotel, headed northwest out of Lufkin, Texas. And this officer did such a good job. They were trying to kind of wait and let this driver make a traffic infraction so that they would have a legit reason to pull him over. Whether it be not using a turn signal, improper lane change, just anything to be able to pull him over in a more legal way. And the driver did finally slip up. The officer was able to make a routine traffic stop at approximately 11:45 on March 13th, 2012. But this wasn't really your typical traffic stop, though, because an FBI field agent arrived shortly after the traffic stop was made. And the FBI field agent was the one who'd asked the driver for his license and registration. The driver handed the officer an Alaskan driver's license with the driver's license number reading 7268639. And the name on the driver's license read Israel Keys. And there is so much more to this, but this is the perfect stopping point for part 1. If you're liking these episodes, rate the show, review the show wherever you're listening, share the episodes with a friend, tag the podcast in a post where somebody's asking for recommendations, yada, yada, yada. Go follow me on TikTok at Mama Murdered a Podcast. You can also find me on Facebook with the same name. On Instagram and Twitter, you'll be looking for murdered_mama. The merch will be out hopefully by the end of this week. I'll have a link where you can go buy whatever you want. And I think I've officially made it as a podcaster because I got a bad review that said I was, what did she say? The host is way too country or way too southern or something like that. So, hey girl, hey, if you're listening. If not, then I guess we can do it again. Same time, same place, next Wednesday. See you then.
That's how my mama murdered a podcast.